Welcome YouTube, it's your boy Matthew Walker, and how y'all doing today, man? How y'all doing today? How y'all doing today? How y'all doing today, man? Listen, hope y'all doing good, staying well, staying healthy, all that great stuff. And before we get in this video, I just want to say a quick thank you for not only 1,900 subscribers, but 1,975. Give it up, man. Give it up. 1,975 subscribers. 1,975. Wow, we 25 away from 2,000, bro. You know what I'm saying? I'm embracing every single moment, every single second. No cap. To every single last one of y'all, thank y'all. I thank you. You know what I'm saying? Thank you for giving the channel a chance. Thank you just for the love and support in the comments. I thank every single last one of y'all. Real talk. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, man. Listen, today's video, we gonna start a Thinking Basketball series, man. Listen, people in the comments were saying, with the Making the Case series, people were saying, yo, Matt, you should check out the Thinking Basketball series, man. You know what I'm saying? That series is a really good series as well. So I was like, bet. You know what I'm saying? We gonna react to it together. You know what I'm saying? And see what we think, man. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, man. Without further ado, if you're new to the channel, you mean drop a like. You can drop a like. That's it. That's all I ask. Drop a like. Love and support. It helps a lot. Real talk. But that's all I ask. Drop a like. And yeah, man. Let's get it. 3, 2, 1. Let's do it, man.
Ever want to hear anybody tell me that he is number one?
Michael Jordan is number 2.
You just can't stand
The greatest of all time.
Here we go.
The GOAT debate.
Yes,
It
sir.
dominates the conversation today, but the original GOAT debate captivated basketball back in the 1960s. Back
Word.
then, the hoops world was divided into two camps. One side argued for Wilt Chamberlain, based on his outlying statistical achievements, and the other for Bill Russell, who collected an astounding 11 championship rings.
Heard.
But what if that whole paradigm is backwards? What if we threw Russell's rings out the window, used Wilt's stats against him, and made the statistical case for Russell over Chamberlain?
Really? Oh, that one was flying. That one was flying.
Has it blocked by
That one was flying.
Michael Jordan saves the day.
On your head. Come
This
here.
series tackles one question. Who was the best at his best? We
Okay.
start at the ABA merger and go through the best multi-year stretches, examining the legends who provided the most on-court impact.
Oh, shout out Thinking
These
Basketball, by the way.
are the greatest peaks.
Original video be in the description.
Before we dive into specific years and criteria, we'll do that at the end of this episode, Wilt and Russell illustrate something at the heart of this series and basketball itself.
Word.
In 1962, Chamberlain famously averaged 50 points and 25 rebounds per game while playing every minute of every game. Many consider it to be the most dominant season in NBA history. I don't think it's one of the 100 best seasons. That may sound crazy, but those 50 points came with a lot of caveats. For one, there were way more scoring chances back in 1962. Teams ran up and down to the tune of about 130 possessions per game. That's about 30 more chances to rack up stats than in a typical game today. More shots, more free throws, rebounds, and so
30
on.
more chances,
We
damn.
examined this stat inflation last year, but the takeaway here is that 50 points per game then isn't what we'd think of as 50 points per game in the three-point era. Maybe the
Right.
easiest way to see this is to note that Wilt scored about 40% of his team's points that season while he was on the court, whereas Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant scored about 43% of their team's points when on the court during their mega-scoring seasons.
Right.
Wilt also played the entire game, which gave him a few extra minutes of impact, but also made his rate of scoring less impressive. The Dipper scored about 29 points every 75 possessions he played that year, which would rank 7th this season, so a huge number, but not an historical outlier. Okay, but so what, you might say? Even with stat inflation, Wilt still crushed Russell as a scorer, right? And he did. Russell's scoring rate was actually below league average for most of his career, But the question here isn't who scored more points per game. It's how much did these players help their teams score more efficiently. Playmaking is the other enormous driver of offensive impact, making life easier for all 4 of your teammates, not just yourself. And Wilt Chamberlain was the original black hole. It wasn't that he couldn't pass or that he never set up his running mates, it's that he very rarely set them up relative to how much he shot. If we look at true shot attempts, that is, when a player took a field goal or attempted 2 free throws, and compare those scoring attempts to assists, we can see just how little Wilt was playmaking. Here are all the non-Chamberlain seasons since the shot clock, with at least 20 true shot attempts per 75 possessions. Now here's Wilt in the first half of his career. He scored more while passing less than just about anyone ever, and that was a criticism of him at the time. It was common to hear refrains like this from Sports Illustrated in 1966. But the tactical demands of using Wilt to his best advantage, that's scoring by the way, severely diminish his team's own versatility and generally create morale problems among those who want the ball as much as he does. Now let's go back to that graph and add his 50-point season. It is an outlier among outliers. This has been hiding in plain sight for 60 years. And the names of those who have even gone over 15-1 should drive home just how one-dimensional his offense was. The only players to cross that threshold in the last decade were Brook Lopez in Brooklyn and Kristaps Porzingis in 2018.
Wow.
The takeaway here is that Wilt's sexy scoring numbers were mostly one-dimensional, and there's only so much you can help your team without making life easier for teammates. Because of that NBA axiom, Chamberlain's team's offenses weren't very good during those volume scoring seasons. They were most efficient in 1962, scoring about 2 points more per 100 than league average, but every other season they were around average, with Chamberlain registering huge numbers. In 1965, his team had the worst offense in the league by a mile before he was traded, and Wilt averaged 39 points per game on solid efficiency that year. This pattern has actually held throughout NBA history. Huge volume scoring doesn't guarantee a good offense. It can help lift teams to competitive levels, raising their floor, if you will, but there are endless combinations of talent that can make an NBA offense slightly below average, besides dumping it into an isolation score 40% of the time. In 1965, Wilt was traded to the Philadelphia 76ers for their 5th and 8th man, and Philadelphia improved from around 500 play to about a 48-win pace. We don't know how much of this improvement was a much-needed defensive boost, but again, big scoring alone didn't create a good offense. Wilt's team offenses actually improved when he finally shot less. Way less, actually. Few players in NBA history have downshifted so severely as a scorer, going from a shooting machine to leading the NBA in assists. In his second full season with the 76ers, Wilt's scoring rate dropped almost down to Russell levels, and his team's offense exploded. There's an enormous negative correlation between Chamberlain's scoring rates and his team's offensive success. The less he shot, the better they did. That doesn't mean his volume shooting hurt his team, but it does suggest that it was holding back his better teammates. Otherwise, why did his coach completely change his style with better players around him? Russell, on the other hand, was never seen as an offensive force, but instead is the benefactor of great teammates. Cousy and Heinsohn at first, then Sam Jones and John Havlicek. But there's an enormous problem with that idea. If there's one thing that hasn't changed in the NBA over the years, it's that most all-star players are recognized for their offense. This includes those Celtics around Bill Russell, and it's often said that his bandmates made Boston a dynasty. But the Celtics weren't actually overflowing with all-star talent then. Here are the all-star appearances by team during Boston's perfect run from 1959 to 1966, excluding Russell and Wilt. Does any club jump out as being completely stacked with all-stars if Wilt or Russell were to join them? If anything, the Lakers, behind Jerry West and Elgin Baylor, 2 of the 5 best players of the period themselves, look like the most top-heavy team. If we add Russell to the Celtics, they end up with the most all-stars, but Wilt's teams weren't lagging far behind. So a bunch of franchises had 2 or 3 all-star players, typically based on offensive play, and since Russell's supporting cast was no different, it should come as no surprise that Boston's offense was around average, or even below average for most of the 1960s. Instead, those Celtics teams won with defense. During Russell's time in Boston, he spearheaded the greatest defensive dynasty the league has ever seen, strangling opponents night after night with a timeless combination of size, speed, mobility, and awareness.
Yeah.
Boston
Outside.
ultimately incorporated solid defensive teammates to platoon around Big Bill, but he was the driving force behind a club that allowed the fewest points per possession in the league in 11 of his 13 seasons. And while most of the NBA was struggling to reach 50 wins at the time due to parity, Russell's Celtics were an outlier, cranking out 60-win seasons.
Give me that.
These circles represent every team's defensive efficiency relative to the league since 1955. The year before Russell arrived, Boston had the worst defense in the league statistically, giving up an estimated 3 points more than league average.
Okay.
With Russell, they jumped to the top of the league and would steadily improve as 1950s names faded and were replaced by stronger and more athletic defenders in 1961. At their peak in 1964, Boston was nearly 10 points better per 100 than other teams on that end, arguably the greatest defensive season ever. As Russell aged and the NBA expanded, Boston remained competitive with its defense until he retired at 35 and then immediately fell back to the pack. All told, Russell captained 5 of the 25 best defensive seasons in league history in a row, an unrivaled team accomplishment. Without a three-point line and primitive spacing that allowed big men to patrol the paint as a backstop, a versatile vertical defender like Russell became the game's most valuable weapon.
Gotcha.
Boston's ascension to record-setting defense coincided with Russell playing more minutes with a platoon of players around him. At their apex, no other Celtic logged more than 33 minutes per night, and Boston's final resurgence in 1969 came with Russell re-upping his minutes alongside Boston's best offensive player at the time, John Havlicek. Many people talk about Wilt dominating Russell heads up because he scored more than Bill. In their 142 meetings on record, Chamberlain averaged over 28 points per game on 51% true shooting, compared to just 14 points per game on 42% true shooting for Russ. But Russell's primary value didn't come from his scoring. He won 5 MVPs because he made scoring harder for the opposition, and Chamberlain was no exception.
Gotcha.
Against everyone else, Wilt averaged 34 points per game on 54% true shooting, so Russell gave him a major haircut, denting his scoring and efficiency. You might think, sure, but Wilt's numbers are still great. But remember, his scoring didn't make his team's offense very potent in the first place. So Russell was blunting what was only a moderately sharp weapon to begin with, imparting that massive defensive impact that drove Boston to title after title every spring. And when Chamberlain was going hog wild trying to score in 1962, Russell gave him a larger haircut. In these 75 games, Wilt didn't face Bill. He averaged 51 points per night on 54% true shooting. Against Russell, he averaged 37 points per game on 50% true shooting. That would rank 11th this year in permanent scoring, similar to Paul George in volume and efficiency. If there were stats like opponent field goal percentage in the paint, or how much did you hold players below their average, pundits might have viewed Russell's performances against Wilt as being dominant. But those stats didn't exist, so Russell's continued success forced people then to search for explanations beyond scoring. Some people like to credit his intangibles as a leader, and others are more dismissive, looking to his teammates as the reason for their success. We don't have precise measuring tools for that period, but if we look at the 28 games Russell missed between 1958 and 1969, the Celtics played at a 35-win pace without him and a 59-win pace when he played. That's super duper impact, especially compared to the changes we saw when Wilt shifted teams. But remember, these are crude measuring tools. Another more comprehensive approach is to also account for teammates who have gone in and out of the lineup over the years by looking at how his teammates impacted teams when they were in and out of the lineup, and so on and so forth. We did something just like this in part 5 of the Thinking Basketball Stats series. And when we solve this giant equation to estimate a player's overall value, looking at just the final score and who played in the game, Russell comes out ahead of Wilt. This is a noisy calculation. It's possible that in reality, these players could be worth a few points more or a few points less per game than these studies conclude, but consider how amazing this is. The only thing this metric uses is who played and what the score was. And yet, its top 25 players claimed 3/4 of the available MVPs and averaged 13 All-Star appearances per player. And again, it says that when we ignore the box score and focus on the relationship between the scoreboard and the player, that Bill Russell is actually better than Wilt Chamberlain. That's incredible to me, even if it's not a definitive proof, and all of this has significant ramifications for the idea of number one options. We typically think about them as the best offensive player on a team, but a great defender like Russell can be the best player on his team by far without being the best or even second best offensive player.
Right.
This was
facts.
often the norm before the
That's
ABA-NBA merger in 1977, and while it's rare today because rule changes have helped elite offensive players while chipping away at elite defensive impact, Tim Duncan's Spurs, Kevin Garnett's Celtics, and arguably Ben Wallace's Pistons are examples of recent teams where the best overall player wasn't head and shoulders the best offensive player. If we return to those impact studies that looked at who played and what the score was, we see something fascinating. Among the top 20 players, a handful are primarily playmakers, a handful are primarily scorers, who are also plentiful playmakers, and another handful are defensive titans. What's so telling to me is that this metric isn't influenced by any of our ideas of scoring, first and second options, or even defense, and yet it's littered with at least 4 completely different types of players. If we use modern play-by-play data to generate a more stable look at this kind of scoreboard-only impact, again, we'd see the exact same results hold. It's a player's overall impact that matters in basketball, and that comes in so many different combinations. In many ways, Wilt and Russell are the original example of this philosophical loggerheads, with Chamberlain bringing offensive and defensive impact, and Russell trying to outpace him, mostly with his giant defensive value. Isolation scoring, like Chamberlain's, can be impressive to watch, and helpful for teams starved of scoring threats, but it can also prevent other offensive talents from flourishing in the absence of playmaking. That means I'll be working off the following criteria for this series. First, this series is about basketball impact on the court. We'll contextualize circumstances and philosophies, but factors like aesthetic appeal are outside of the scope here. Second, I care about someone's overall impact, specifically how much they can help a team win championships. That means skills that scale up to better teams tend to matter more than skills that can't mesh with other top-flight players. Third, we're starting in 1977 when the leagues merged. While the game continues to evolve, the size of the league and its competitiveness are similar since the merger, making for fair comparisons, which will be made relative to the league in a given year. There are no time machines here. Instead, we're trying to understand how much a player impacted the game given the rules and practices of that time. And finally, those peaks must contain multiple consecutive seasons. The key reason for this approach is to avoid fluky, single-season outcomes and to increase the breadth of information to evaluate a player. At the end of this series, we'll revisit how all these guys stack up, but otherwise the episodes will flow roughly in chronological order, profiling the greatest peaks in NBA history. If you're interested in isolation scoring in greater detail, and specifically Wilt's, it's a main theme in Thinking Basketball the book and chronicled in the Back Picks Top 40 series. Russell and Chamberlain would certainly be featured in a great peak series that went back to the shot clock, along with the two 60s megastars Oscar Robertson and Jerry West, but due to a lack of footage and data, they're difficult to compare on even ground. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end.
Hey, man. Shout out to the homie right here, man. Again, I'm gonna link his stuff as original video down in the description. I know this took a minute. This took a minute to make. I can understand with editing and all that stuff. I know this took a long minute. So I really do appreciate his dedication and commitment to making this series, you know what I'm saying, work for everyone else to see. So really appreciate that, bro. Real talk. Hey, okay. All right, bet. So we got episode 1 down. So tomorrow we're gonna react to episode 2. And we're gonna see who's crack-a-lackin'. I like this whole chronological order he's doing, and then we're gonna have our conclusions by the last episode. I bet. You know what I'm saying? Hope y'all enjoyed this video, man. If you did, make sure you drop a like. You know what I'm saying? And if you want to join the fam, you can. You don't have to, but you can. We grinding over here. We grinding. No, never ending content, lit content, basketball content. If you want to join, you could join. But yeah, man, that's gonna wow. That's gonna do it for this video, man. Make sure y'all stay well, stay healthy, stay blessed. Thank you guys very much, man. Peace. I'm out.